A man stands in chains. His back is shredded from the whip. His name has been stripped, replaced by a number, a brand, a scar. He owns nothing, not his body, not his time, not even the right to look his master in the eye. And yet, within a decade, this same man will sit on a throne. Armies will kneel before him. Empires will tremble at the sound of his name, and the very system that once sold him like cattle will burn to the ground under his command. Sounds like fiction, right? It's not. It happened. More than once. History is packed with kings who inherited crowns, generals who were born into power, and emperors who simply showed up at the right family dinner. Those stories are everywhere. But the ones you almost never hear, the ones that got buried, rewritten, or deliberately erased, are the stories of men who started at the absolute bottom of human existence. Enslaved, branded, dehumanized, and somehow clawed their way not just to freedom, but to the very top of the power structure that once crushed them. By the end of this video, you'll know 3 of the most extraordinary among them. And the last one pulled off something so audacious, so world-shaking, that European superpowers spent years trying to pretend it never happened. To understand how a slave becomes a king, you first need to understand what slavery actually looked like across different centuries and civilizations. Because it wasn't one thing. In medieval Islamic empires, enslaved boys were sometimes purchased specifically to be trained as elite soldiers. In the Caribbean, enslaved Africans were worked to death on sugar plantations with a life expectancy that would make you physically sick. And in parts of ancient Africa, captured warriors could be sold across continents, stripped of identity, language, and lineage. The common thread? In every single case, the enslaved person was considered property. A tool. Something less than human, which makes what these men accomplished not just impressive, but almost incomprehensible. And the first one didn't just beat the system, he built an entirely new one on top of its ruins. His name was Baybars. Born around 1223 somewhere in the Kipchak steppes north of the Black Sea, he was captured by Mongol raiders as a child, sold at a slave market in Syria, and purchased by a sultan of Egypt's Ayyubid dynasty. Not to serve tea, not to carry luggage, to fight. Baybars was enrolled into the Mamluks, an elite military caste composed entirely of enslaved boys trained from childhood in combat, horsemanship, and warfare. The word Mamluk literally translates to one who is owned. These boys were property with swords, tools of war that the Sultan pointed at whatever problem needed killing. But here's where it gets complicated. The Mamluks were so effective, so disciplined, and so terrifyingly good at their jobs that they became more powerful than the masters who bought them. Imagine buying a guard dog and waking up one morning to find the dog sitting in your chair, wearing your robe, and making policy decisions. That's essentially what happened. Baybars rose through the ranks with a speed that alarmed everyone paying attention. He was brilliant on the battlefield, ruthless in strategy, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to read the movements of his enemies before they made them. His defining moment came in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut, a confrontation that most historians consider one of the most important battles in human history, and yet most people have never heard of it. The Mongol Empire, the single most destructive military force the world had ever seen, was steamrolling through the Middle East. They had already obliterated Baghdad, massacring hundreds of thousands and effectively ending the Islamic Golden Age in a single week of carnage. They were coming for Egypt next, and everyone assumed Egypt would fall just like everything else had. Baybars didn't get that memo. He led the Mamluk vanguard in a tactical ambush that lured the Mongol cavalry into a trap, then crushed them. It was the first major defeat the Mongol Empire had ever suffered in open battle. The unstoppable force had been stopped by a former slave. But winning the battle created a new problem. The Sultan who commanded the Mamluks, Qutuz, had no intention of sharing glory or power with an enslaved soldier, no matter how spectacular his victory. Baybars expected a reward. He got political maneuvering and broken promises instead. So Baybars did what any ambitious military genius with a personal army and a grudge would do. He assassinated Sultan Qutuz during a hunting trip and seized the throne of Egypt for himself in 1260. The former slave boy from the Kipchak steppes was now Sultan of Egypt and Syria, And he wasn't just a figurehead. Over the next 17 years, Baybars transformed the Mamluk Sultanate into one of the most formidable powers on Earth. He repelled Crusader invasions, dismantled fortress after fortress along the Levantine coast, established a sophisticated postal system, built infrastructure, and created a spy network that would make modern intelligence agencies jealous. He died in 1277, possibly from drinking poisoned kumis meant for someone else. Even his death was dramatic, but the dynasty he established lasted for nearly 3 centuries, and the Mamluk military system he perfected became a model studied by generals for generations. A child ripped from his homeland, sold like livestock, and trained to kill for someone else's ambitions had rewritten the political map of the medieval world. But Baybars at least had military training. He was forged into a weapon, even if he chose his own target. The next story is about a man who had nothing. No training, no army, no plan. Just chains, a stolen moment of opportunity, and an iron will that refused to break. His name was Skanderbeg, and while he wasn't born into slavery in the traditional sense, what happened to him was arguably worse. Born Gheorghe Castrioti in 1405 in Albania, he was taken as a child hostage by the Ottoman Empire as part of the devshirme system, a practice where Christian boys from conquered territories were forcibly taken from their families, converted to Islam, and trained to serve the Ottoman state. Some became bureaucrats, some became soldiers. All of them were stripped of their identity, their religion, their names, and any connection to their former lives. Young Gheorghe was sent to the Ottoman court, given the name Iskander, and molded into an Ottoman military commander. He was, by every measurable standard, Ottoman property reshaped into an Ottoman tool, and he was exceptional at it. He fought campaigns across the Balkans and earned a reputation as one of the empire's most capable officers. The Ottomans trusted him. They rewarded him. They believed he was theirs. They were catastrophically wrong. In 1443, during the Battle of Nis, where Ottoman forces suffered a crushing defeat against a Hungarian-led crusade, Skanderbeg saw his window. In the chaos of retreat, he deserted the Ottoman army, forged letters granting him control of the fortress of Kruja in Albania, rode there at full speed, raised the Albanian flag, and declared open rebellion against the most powerful empire in the known world. Let that sink in. A man raised from childhood to serve the Ottomans, trained by them, trusted by them, used their own bureaucratic system to forge his freedom, then turned their own military training against them. What followed was 25 years of guerrilla warfare so effective that the Ottoman Empire, which was simultaneously conquering Constantinople and terrifying all of Europe, could not subdue a single Albanian nobleman with a fraction of their resources. Skanderbeg used Albania's mountainous terrain like a weapon, luring massive Ottoman armies into narrow passes and annihilating them with smaller, faster forces. He defeated Ottoman invasions repeatedly, sometimes against armies 10 times his size. The Ottomans sent their best generals. Skanderbeg beat them. They sent larger armies. He beat those too. They offered him wealth, titles, and power to come back. He refused every single time. Pope Pius II called him the champion of Christ. The kings of Naples and Venice sent him aid. For a quarter century, this former child hostage held off the largest military power on the planet with nothing but mountainous terrain, tactical brilliance, and a rage that had been building since the day they took him from his family. Skanderbeg died of malaria in 1468 at the age of 62. Without his leadership, Albania fell to the Ottomans within a decade, but his legacy became the foundational myth of Albanian national identity, a symbol that endures to this day. He had been taken as a boy, erased, reshaped, and deployed as a weapon for his captors, and he used every single skill they gave him to dismantle their control over his homeland. But even Skanderbeg's rebellion, as extraordinary as it was, pales in comparison to what the next man accomplished. Because the next story isn't about one man escaping bondage. It's about an entire enslaved population rising up and defeating the most powerful armies on Earth. And the man who led them did something that the Western world declared absolutely impossible. His name was Toussaint Louverture, and his story is the one that empires tried hardest to erase. Born into slavery around 1743 on a sugar plantation in Saint-Domingue, the French colony that occupied the western half of the island of Hispaniola, Toussaint spent the first 50 years of his life in bondage. 50 years. By the time most revolutionary leaders are already dead or retired, Toussaint hadn't even started. Saint-Domingue was, at the time, the single most profitable colony on the planet. It produced more sugar, coffee, and indigo than any other territory in the Americas. It was also, without exaggeration, one of the most brutal places in human history. The enslaved population outnumbered free colonists by roughly 10 to 1, and the methods used to maintain control were so savage that even other slaveholding societies found them extreme. Workers were routinely tortured, mutilated, and killed as examples. The average life expectancy for an enslaved person arriving from Africa was 3 to 5 years, not decades, years. Toussaint was unusual among the enslaved. He had learned to read, had studied military texts, and had gained a reputation among his fellow enslaved people as a healer and a leader long before the revolution began. But he didn't start the uprising. In August 1791, a massive slave revolt erupted across the northern plains of Saint-Domingue. Plantations burned, colonists fled. The Caribbean's most profitable colony was suddenly engulfed in a war that nobody in Europe thought was possible, because the prevailing belief was that enslaved Africans were incapable of organized resistance. Toussaint entered the conflict and within months demonstrated a military and political genius that stunned everyone. He trained formerly enslaved people into disciplined fighting units. He played the Spanish, British, and French against each other with a diplomatic sophistication that European leaders couldn't comprehend coming from a man they considered subhuman. When Spain offered him an alliance against France, he took it. When France offered abolition, he switched sides. When Britain invaded the island with 20,000 troops expecting an easy conquest, Toussaint's forces, combined with yellow fever, annihilated them. Britain lost more soldiers in Saint-Domingue than they would later lose at Waterloo. By 1801, Toussaint controlled the entire island. He drafted a constitution. He declared himself governor-general for life. He maintained the plantation economy, but with paid labor. He built schools. He negotiated with world powers as an equal. A formerly enslaved man was now running the most productive territory in the Western Hemisphere, and doing it competently. Napoleon Bonaparte could not tolerate this, not because Toussaint was a military threat to France itself, but because of what he represented. If enslaved people could successfully revolt, govern themselves, and defeat European armies, then the entire ideological foundation of colonialism and the Atlantic slave trade collapsed. Toussaint's existence was an argument that the Western world was not prepared to hear. In 1802, Napoleon dispatched his brother-in-law, General Leclerc, with over 40,000 soldiers, the largest expeditionary force France had ever sent across the Atlantic, with secret orders to restore slavery on the island. Under the pretense of peace negotiations, French forces captured Toussaint through treachery, arrested him, and shipped him to France, where he was imprisoned in a freezing fortress in the Jura Mountains. Toussaint Louverture died in his cell on April 7, 1803, of pneumonia and starvation. He was 59 years old, but here's what Napoleon didn't understand. Toussaint wasn't the revolution. He was its symbol. The movement he built didn't die with him. His lieutenants, Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henri Christophe, continued the war with a ferocity that made the previous years look like a warm-up. Yellow fever devastated the French forces. Dessalines showed no mercy. By November 1803, the last French soldiers evacuated the island. On January 1, 1804, Dessalines declared independence and renamed the nation Haiti, the original indigenous Taino name for the island. It was the first and only successful large-scale slave revolt in human history. It was the first independent black republic in the world, and it was accomplished by defeating the army of Napoleon Bonaparte, the same military machine that had conquered most of Europe. The Western world's response? Punish Haiti for existing. France demanded reparations, not from France to Haiti for centuries of slavery, but from Haiti to France for the loss of property, meaning the enslaved people who had freed themselves. Haiti was forced to pay 150 million francs, a debt that crippled the nation's economy for over a century. The United States refused to recognize Haiti's independence for nearly 60 years. European powers imposed trade embargoes. The message was clear: we will make you pay for proving us wrong. Boibars took the military machine that enslaved him and used it to build an empire. Every enslaved soldier who learned to fight, every captive who studied his master's language, every person in chains who watched and waited and remembered, they weren't just surviving, they were collecting intelligence. The most dangerous person in any empire isn't the rival king across the border. It's the one inside the walls who has nothing left to lose and knows exactly how the machine operates. If these stories hit different, subscribe to the channel. There's another video right here about rulers who rose from absolutely nothing. I'll see you there.